There is something about moving into a new house that feels like pressing reset on your entire life. The scent of fresh paint, the echo of your footsteps in empty rooms, the thrill of possibility. Every corner holds a promise, or maybe a secret. But beneath that excitement, there's always a flicker of unease. What if the walls could talk? What if the house remembers things you'd rather forget? Tonight, I'm going to share 3 disturbing true stories that will make you question what really happens after the boxes are unpacked and the lights go out. If you think a new home means a fresh start, you might want to think again. By the end of this video, you'll never look at moving into a new house the same way again. When my wife Emily and I first stepped into our new house, it felt like we'd finally made it. We were both in our late 20s, just married, and this was our first real home. Together, a little 2-story place on a quiet street with a creaky porch and a backyard big enough for a dog we didn't have yet. The kind of house you imagine growing old in. I remember the way the sunlight spilled through the windows that first morning, making everything look golden and full of promise. We laughed as we unpacked boxes, arguing over where to put the couch, and dreaming about the life we'd build here. But even on that first day, there was something off. It was subtle. A draft that seemed to come from nowhere. A faint smell of old wood and something else. Something metallic that lingered in the hallway. I brushed it off as nerves. After all, every old house has its quirks. It wasn't until our second night that we noticed the door. We were carrying a box of books upstairs when Emily stopped, her brow furrowed. "Did you see this before?" she asked, pointing to a narrow door at the end of the hallway. It was painted the same dull white as the walls, almost camouflaged, and I realized I hadn't noticed it during the walkthrough. The realtor hadn't mentioned it either. I tried the handle, it didn't budge. "Probably just a closet," I said, forcing a laugh. But the lock was old, the kind with a keyhole big enough to peer through. I pressed my eye to it, but all I saw was darkness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that door, about what might be behind it. I told myself it was nothing, but my mind wouldn't let it go. I imagined forgotten boxes, maybe a broken chair, or worse, something left behind by the previous owner. Emily teased me about it, but I could tell she was curious too. The next day I called the realtor. She sounded surprised. "A locked door? I don't remember that," she said, her voice tight. "Maybe it's just a utility closet. Old houses have all sorts of weird spaces." She promised to look into it, but I could tell she was brushing me off. That evening I found myself standing in front of the door again, the hallway dim and silent. I tried the handle, jiggled it, even tried a few old keys we'd found in a kitchen drawer. Nothing worked. Emily joined me, her arms crossed. "Maybe we should just leave it," she said, but I could see the unease in her eyes. A week passed. The door became an obsession. I'd catch myself staring at it, listening for sounds on the other side. Sometimes late at night, I thought I heard faint scratching, like fingernails on wood. But when I pressed my ear to the door, there was only silence. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I borrowed a set of lockpicks from a friend, don't ask, and spent an hour kneeling in the hallway, my hands shaking. Emily hovered behind me, biting her lip. When the lock finally clicked, the sound echoed down the hall like a gunshot. The door swung open with a groan. The air inside was cold, stale, and thick with dust. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight and stepped inside. It wasn't a closet. It was a small, windowless room, the walls covered in peeling wallpaper. In the center was a battered wooden desk, and on it a stack of yellowed notebooks. Emily picked one up, flipping through the pages. Her face went pale. "Look at this," she whispered. The notebooks were filled with frantic handwriting, page after page about the house, about keeping it safe, about watching the walls. There were drawings, too, crude sketches of the house, always with dark shapes lurking in the corners. On the last page, scrawled in shaky letters, was a warning. "Don't let them out. The house remembers. We stood there, the silence pressing in, both of us suddenly aware of how old and empty the house felt. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound died in my throat. That night, I dreamed of locked doors and whispering walls. And sometimes when the house settles and the floorboards creak, I wonder if we really opened just a room or something else entirely. If you think that's unsettling, just wait. Not every new house horror is about what's hidden. Sometimes it's about what's watching you. It's strange how a single locked door can change the way you see your entire home, how secrets buried in the walls can make every shadow feel alive. But not every nightmare is hidden behind a door. Sometimes, the real terror is right outside your window, watching and waiting. The next story isn't about what you find, it's about what finds you. After my breakup with Jamie, I needed a fresh start. Somewhere quiet, somewhere I could breathe. That's how I ended up in a sleepy suburb, renting a small, sunlit house at the end of a cul-de-sac. The place was nothing fancy, but it felt like a blank page. I spent my first morning there, with the windows open, letting the breeze carry away the stale air and the last traces of my old life. For the first time in months, I felt almost okay. The neighborhood was peaceful, almost eerily so. Kids rode bikes in the afternoons, sprinklers ticked across perfect lawns, and every evening, the sky turned a soft, watercolor pink. I told myself I'd landed exactly where I needed to be. But it didn't take long for the unease to creep in. It started with a feeling like I was being watched. I'd be making coffee or scrolling through my phone, and suddenly, I'd get this prickling sensation on the back of my neck. At first, I laughed it off. New house jitters, I thought. But the feeling wouldn't go away. One afternoon, as I was unpacking in the living room, glanced out the window and saw someone standing in the house across the street. An older man, maybe in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and a faded flannel shirt. He was just staring. Not at the street, not at the sky, at me. Our eyes met, and for a second I froze. Then he turned away, disappearing behind a curtain. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just curious about the new neighbor. But over the next few days, I kept catching glimpses of him, always at his window, always watching. Sometimes he'd be there in the morning, sometimes late at night, his silhouette framed by the glow of a lamp. I started keeping my blinds closed, but it didn't help. I could feel his gaze, even when I couldn't see him. I told myself I was being paranoid. I tried to focus on settling in, hanging pictures, buying groceries, making the place feel like home. But the sense of being watched only grew stronger. I started hearing things at night, the creak of floorboards, the soft tap of something against the glass. Once, I woke up to find my porch light had been unscrewed, leaving the front of my house in darkness. One evening, I decided I'd had enough. I marched across the street, heart pounding, and knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Finally, the door creaked open, and there he was, staring at me with watery blue eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice flat. I tried to sound casual. "Hi, I'm your new neighbor. I just wanted to introduce myself." He didn't smile. "I know who you are. I see you." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I forced a laugh. "Well, if you ever need anything, I'm right across the street." He just nodded and closed the door in my face. After that, things got worse. I started finding footprints in my backyard, muddy prints that didn't match my shoes. A mailbox was left open, even after I'd closed it. One night I woke up to the sound of tapping on my bedroom window. When I pulled back the curtain, there was no one there. But I could see the neighbor's silhouette in his window, watching. I called the police, but they said there was nothing they could do. "He's just looking out his window," the officer said, almost amused. It's not a crime, but I knew it was more than that. I started sleeping with a baseball bat by my bed, jumping at every sound. My safe, sunlit house felt smaller every day, the walls closing in. Then one night, I woke to the sound of my front door creaking open. grabbed the bat and crept down the hallway, heart hammering. The door was ajar, swinging in the breeze. I stepped outside, scanning the yard. Nothing. But when I looked across the street, the neighbor's window was dark for the first time since I'd moved in. I never saw him again after that night. His house sat empty, the curtains drawn tight. Sometimes I wonder if he was ever really there at all, or if the house, or something in it, wanted me to feel watched. I still don't know what he wanted, or what he saw when he looked at me. But I do know this. Sometimes the scariest thing about a new home isn't what's inside, it's what's looking in. There's nothing quite like the feeling of being watched in your own home, the place that's supposed to be your sanctuary. But as unsettling as it is to have eyes on you from across the street, some houses hold something even darker inside their walls. If you thought that was disturbing, wait until you hear what happened to the next family. Sometimes the house itself doesn't want you to leave. When we first saw the old Victorian on Maple Street, it felt like stepping into a storybook. My wife Sarah fell in love with the wraparound porch and the stained glass windows. Our daughter Lily was only 5, but she twirled through the empty rooms like a princess in a castle. The house was over 100 years old, with creaky floorboards and a grand staircase that seemed to spiral up forever. It needed work, sure, but we saw it as a project, a place to put down roots and build memories. The first few weeks were a blur of painting, unpacking, and exploring. Every day we'd discover something new, a hidden alcove, a dusty old trunk in the attic, a faded mural behind peeling wallpaper. At night, the house groaned and settled, but we told ourselves it was just the age, the wood stretching and sighing after so many years. But then things started to change. Began with Lily. She'd always been a good sleeper, but now she'd wake up crying, insisting that someone was in her room. "The lady in the hallway?" she whispered one night, her eyes wide and glassy. "She doesn't like me here." Sarah and I exchanged nervous glances, but we chalked it up to nightmares and the stress of moving. Then came the cold spots. No matter how high we cranked the heat, certain rooms stayed icy, the air thick and heavy. Sometimes I'd walk into the kitchen and see my breath fog in front of me. The lights would flicker, and the radio would turn on by itself, always too static. Doors we'd closed would be open in the morning, and once we found every window in the house wide open, letting in the chill night air. Sarah tried to stay positive, but I could see the strain wearing on her. She started jumping at every sound, locking and relocking the doors. Lily grew quieter, spending hours staring at the staircase or whispering to someone we couldn't see. One afternoon, I found her sitting at the top of the stairs, her tiny hands covering her ears. "She's mad," Lily said, her voice barely a whisper. "She wants us to go." I started researching the house's history, desperate for answers. I found old newspaper clippings about a fire in the 1920s, a family who'd lost their daughter in the flames. The more I read, the more I felt the house closing in around us, as if it was feeding on our fear. The final straw came one night when Sarah woke me, her face pale and terrified. "Lily's gone," she gasped. We tore through the house, calling her name, our voices echoing off the walls. We found her in the basement, standing in front of a bricked-up doorway we'd never noticed before. She was humming a lullaby we'd never taught her, her eyes fixed on something we couldn't see. I grabbed her, pulling her close, and as I did, the house seemed to shudder. The lights exploded overhead and the air filled with the stench of smoke and burning wood. We ran, stumbling up the stairs, the walls seeming to close in, the floorboards buckling beneath our feet. Every door we tried was stuck, as if the house itself was holding us back. Finally, we burst through the front door and into the night, gasping for air. Behind us, the house stood silent and still, its windows dark and empty. We didn't look back. We moved out the next day, leaving everything behind. For weeks, Lily barely spoke. When she finally did, she looked up at me with solemn eyes and said, She's still there. She's waiting. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of that house, the way it seemed to breathe, the way it watched us. I wonder if we ever truly escaped, or if a part of us is still trapped inside, wandering those endless halls. And I wonder about the next family, the next set of footsteps echoing through those rooms, whether the house will ever let them go. Moving into a new house is supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to leave old worries behind and build something better. But as these stories show, sometimes the unknown isn't just outside your door, it's already waiting for you inside. Whether it's a locked room hiding secrets, a neighbor who never blinks, or a house that refuses to let go, the line between safety and fear can blur in the places we call home. Maybe that's why these stories hit so hard. We all want to believe that our homes are sanctuaries, that the walls will protect us from whatever's out there. But what if the real danger is what we can't see, or what we refuse to notice? What if the house itself is trying to tell us something? If you've ever had a strange experience after moving somewhere new, I want to hear about it. Share your own new house horror stories in the comments below, because sometimes the scariest tales are the ones that actually happened. And next time you move, pay attention to what your new house is trying to tell you. You never know what might be waiting behind the next closed door.